Jonas Hale yanked the reins when he saw a body collapsed in the red dust. It was a tall Apache woman. Her muscular frame was covered in dust and dried blood. Purple welts from a whip marked her shoulders and back, and her wrists were still bound with a strip of leather. Clear signs she had been tied up. Her breathing was shallow, and her chest rose and fell in faint, uneven motions. Jonas leapt from his saddle and dropped to his knees beside her. Heat radiated off the ground in shimmering waves. But colder still was the thought that flashed through his mind. This could be a trap. The Apache tribe had warned him more than once not to meddle in their affairs. He placed his hand on her neck. Her pulse was so faint, it felt like it might vanish at any second. If he left her here, the sun would kill her within a few hours. Gritting his teeth, Jonas drew the knife from his belt and sliced through the leather binding. Then he hoisted her over his shoulder. She was heavy, like carrying a whole sack of grain. But he powered through and threw her across the horse's back. "Damn it," he muttered, kicking the horse. The horse bolted forward, red dust swirling in its wake. The scent of blood, sweat, and hot sand mixed in the air. Jonas did not look back. If anyone was watching, they would know whose side he had chosen, and this time there would be no turning back. Jonas Hale galloped through the rickety wooden gate, rushing inside the cabin. He gently lowered her down, laying her on an old blanket spread beside the fireplace, then hurried to start a fire. Flickering yellow light danced across his sun-darkened, sweat-soaked face. He dragged over the wooden bucket and scooped what little water remained in the tank. Every sip of water during the dry season was worth its weight in gold. But Jonas soaked a cloth and used it to wipe the dust and dried blood from her face. The pulse at her wrist was still faint, but at least she was alive. Jonas had never been one to get tangled in other people's problems. A few years back, disease had swept through this land and taken his wife and 2 young sons. Since then, he had lived like a ghost, tending only to the parched land and his small herd of cattle. He stayed away from town, and even farther away from the trouble that came with other people. But what he had done tonight shattered all of that. The woman before him, Tala, was unlike the Apache women he had seen before. Her body was powerful, with bulging arms and broad shoulders like a warrior. The whip marks on her back told of a brutal punishment, likely for betraying tribal law. Jonas knew one thing for certain. If the tribe found out he had taken her in, they would brand him an enemy. Outside, night was falling fast. Prairie winds swept sand through the cracks in the cabin walls, carrying with them the lingering heat of the day. Jonas threw more wood into the fire and dropped down beside Tala. The flames lit up his face, weathered and sun-scorched, with gray eyes that were cold but deep. He handed her the last bit of water in a small bowl. She parted her lips slightly, drank slowly, and then slipped into unconsciousness. Jonas let out a heavy breath and pulled the rifle close, resting it within arm's reach. He leaned back against the wooden wall, eyes fixed on the door. He knew exactly what kind of people would leave a woman to die in the desert, and that they might return to finish what they started. And tonight, if they did, Jonas Hale would be the one standing in the doorway. The fire in the hearth had faded, leaving only a bed of glowing embers. Jonas dozed in his chair, the rifle resting across his lap. A faint rustling sound snapped him awake. Tala. She pushed herself upright, her dark eyes wide and wild with panic. In an instant, her large hand snatched the small knife from beside the stove. Steel flashed in the firelight. Jonas did not move. He slowly raised both hands, his voice low and gravelly. "If you are going to stab me, do it clean. But if you want to live, put the knife down." Tala was panting, sweat beading on her forehead. Her eyes darted around the cabin. Small, old but not a prison. Then to the man in front of her. Tall, lean, unshaven, with eyes that were steady and cold. She hesitated. Jonas kept his voice calm. "I cut your bonds. If you want to leave, that door is open. But out there is nothing but hot sand and vultures." The knife trembled in her grip. After a long pause, she let out a breath and dropped it to the floor. Her powerful body collapsed like a felled tree. Jonas stepped forward, picked up the blade, and handed her the last bowl of water. "Drink," You need it more than I do. Tala took the bowl and drank in slow sips. Her eyes never left Jonas, as if trying to figure out if this was some kind of trap. Without another word, Jonas stepped out onto the porch and sat on the edge of the steps, his rifle across his lap. Tala tilted her head, watching through the door. In the moonlight, the man's silhouette remained still as stone. The only movement was the faint wisps of smoke, curling from his cigarette. That entire night, Tala did not sleep. Each time the nightmares came, she opened her eyes and saw Jonas still there, never coming in, but never leaving either. A strange feeling began to stir in her chest, something she thought had died with her past. A sense of safety. By the time the sky began to pale, Jonas had not moved. He simply turned his head and spoke quietly. If you want to stay until you are strong again, you can. If you want to leave, I will not stop you. The choice is yours. Tala stared at him, then turned her face away. She said nothing, but her hand tightened around the blanket draped over her shoulders. And that was her answer. The sun rose, casting its light down on the weathered roof of the cabin. Tala could stand on her own now. She stepped out into the yard, her shoulders still roughly bandaged, but her gaze sharp and focused. Jonas was fixing a broken section of fence, not bothering to look up. You are stronger, he said in an even tone. If you want to eat, there is a spot to haul water behind the cattle pen. Tala said nothing, but a moment later, she picked up a wooden bucket and made her way to the water tank. Her thick, muscular arms flexed beneath sun-darkened skin. As she pulled up the bucket, Jonas glanced over. Someone who had nearly died just the night before and was already strong enough to work. It caught him by surprise. That day, Tala said almost nothing, simply followed Jonas in silence, watching how he patched the fence and mixed mud to repair the walls. As the afternoon faded and Jonas finally paused to rest, she suddenly stepped forward, picked up the hammer, and finished driving in the last posts. Jonas stood still for a moment, then gave a quiet nod and let her carry on. That evening, for the first time, Tala lit the kitchen fire without being asked. She cooked a simple rabbit stew and set it down in front of Jonas without a word. He looked at the bowl, then at her. A silent nod was all the thanks he gave. In the days that followed, the cabin was no longer so quiet. The sound of hammers, shovels, and wood clashing together filled the air. Jonas dug a new water hole. Tala hauled stones to block the wind. Her strength was so great, she rebuilt an entire section of the fence in just one afternoon. One evening, as the sunlight faded, the two of them sat on the front porch. Jonas lit a cigarette, and Tala whittled a small knife. For the first time she spoke. Why did you save me? Jonas stared out at the cracked dry fields. Because I could not bear to see someone left out there. I have seen too much death. Tala was silent. After a moment, she nodded. A simple answer, but something inside her seemed to uncoil and loosen. That night, as the wind rustled through the old roof, Tala no longer tossed and turned. For the first time in months, she slept deeply. While outside the cabin, Jonas's slow, steady footsteps circled the homestead. That afternoon, the sky suddenly turned a harsh golden hue. Jonas was tightening the reins on his old horse when the sound of hooves echoed in the distance. His head snapped up. On the horizon, a faint trail of dust was growing larger. Uninvited guests, Jonas muttered, grabbing the Winchester propped up on the porch. Tala heard the sound and stepped outside. The moment she saw the riders, she froze. 3 Apache warriors on horseback approached the entrance to the ranch. Their faces were painted for war, their eyes cold as ice. The one in front nudged his horse forward and spoke in a deep, flat voice. Our woman is here. Hand her over. Tala took a step back, her hand instinctively gripping the small knife at her side. Jonas stepped forward, placing himself between the cabin door and the riders, the rifle steady in his hands. She is injured. She has the right to stay here until she is healed. Another warrior snarled, his voice rising. She has been cast out by the tribe. She has no right to live on this land. If you shelter her, you become our enemy. Jonas did not lower his gun. His gray eyes were cold steel. If you want to kill someone, you will have to go through me first. The silence that followed was taut as a drawn bow. The wind kicked up red dust, swirling around the horse's hooves. From behind, Jonas, Tala stared at him, his face calm, but his shoulders tense, ready to fire at the first wrong move. Finally, the lead warrior lowered his spear, his gaze burning with fury. "We will return. Next time we will not come alone." They yanked the reins and galloped off, leaving behind a trail of dust and a heavy, suffocating silence in the yard. Tala gripped her knife so tightly, her knuckles turned white. Jonas turned back toward her, the fire still flickering in his eyes. "They will come back with more," he said quietly. "If you still want to stay, we have to prepare." Tala nodded, her eyes now lit with a different kind of fire. Not fear, but the burning will to survive. That night, Jonas lit the lantern and dragged out every round of ammunition and every old sandbag from the shed. Tala stood beside him, sleeves rolled up, helping him barricade the windows and build up defenses in the yard. For the first time since she had come here, she was no longer just a refugee. She had chosen to stand with him for the battle to come. 3 days later, before the sun had fully set, red dust began to rise on the horizon. Jonas stood on the porch, his Winchester in hand. Tala had tied her hair back, gripping a spear and a knife. Her stance was that of a warrior, ready for battle. The sound of hooves grew louder, until nearly 20 Apache riders swept in, surrounding the ranch in a tight circle. The air was thick, with the smell of horse sweat and tanned leather. The warriors remained silent, save for the heavy snorts of their horses. An elder stepped forward. He was old, with long silver hair and a deerskin cloak draped over his shoulders. His face was as stern as stone. He looked at Jonas, then at Tala standing tall behind him. "She was cast out. She belongs to the dust. Why do you keep her?" Jonas did not lower his rifle. "Because she is still alive, and she has the right to choose." A murmur rippled through the circle. A young warrior shouted, "She dishonored the tribe. She cannot be allowed to live." Tala stepped forward, her voice thunderous. "I dishonored no one. I was punished for not bearing children. But that is no crime." Silence spread like a wave. The warriors looked at one another, though the fire in their eyes still burned. The elder turned his gaze to Tala. "You choose to live here under the roof of a white man. That means you sever all ties to the tribe." Tala gripped the shaft of her spear and nodded. "I choose life here." The elder was quiet for a long moment. Then he raised his hand. "We will leave tonight, but at dawn I will return with the council of elders. If you are still here by then, you will no longer be a daughter of the tribe. And you," he turned to Jonas, "you will bear the consequences." He turned his horse, and the entire war party followed, their hooves thundering, as red dust swirled over the fence line. Once they had vanished from sight, Jonas lowered his rifle. Tala still stood tall, her chest rising and falling with every breath. Jonas looked at her, his voice low. "By morning, everything will change. Are you sure?" Tala met his eyes, her gaze burning with fire. "I already died once out there. I will not die again." Jonas noted, tightening his grip on the rifle. The night ahead would be long, and when the sun rose, this ranch might become a battlefield. At dawn the next morning, the sky turned a deep, burnished bronze. Jonas had been awake long before the rooster crowed. He stood on the porch, rifle fully loaded. Inside, Tala was tightening the bandage on her shoulder, her eyes sharp and cold as steel. A horn sounded in the distance, low and thunderous like a storm. Then the riders appeared, not just a small group this time, but the full council of elders and their escort. At least 50 people surrounded the ranch. In a solid circle, a path opened before the gate. The silver-haired elder rode forward. Behind him came 2 older women, their dark hair streaked with gray. Members of the matriarchal council, those with the power to decide Tala's fate. Tala stepped out, standing tall. The morning light caught the scars on her sun-darkened skin, marks from whips that had not yet fully healed. She no longer stood behind Jonas. She stood beside him, shoulder to shoulder. One of the elder women spoke. "Tala, daughter of the tribe, today, we ask for the last time. Do you choose to return and face judgment, or do you choose the path of permanent exile?" Tala took a deep breath. The early wind swept through, tossing her hair into a wild storm. "I will not return," she said clearly. "I choose life. Life on my own terms, not under an unjust sentence." Murmurs rippled through the circle. Some warriors gripped their spears tighter. Others bowed their heads, as if silently accepting what they had heard. The other elder woman gave a slow nod. "From this day forward, your name is struck from the lineage. You are no longer a daughter of the tribe. You will not be buried in ancestral soil. But from this day on, the tribe will no longer hunt you." The old chief turned his gaze to Jonas, his eyes sharp as blades. "You sheltered her. That means her fate is now bound to yours. If she sheds blood because of this choice, that blood is also on your hands." Jonas did not look away. "I understand." A moment passed, one that felt as long as a lifetime. Then the elder raised his hand. One by one, the warriors turned their horses and withdrew from the circle. Only when the sound of hoofbeats had faded did Tala finally exhale. Her broad shoulders trembled, but her eyes were lit with fire. Jonas looked at her for a long time, then gave a slow nod. "You just chose a new life," he said. Tala answered softly, her voice rough but proud. "Number I chose myself." That afternoon, the sky turned pitch black without warning. After weeks of drought, the first drops of rain fell on the dusty roof of the cabin. The scent of wet earth rose thick in the air, as if the whole prairie was letting out a long, weary sigh. Jonas stood on the porch, rain soaking through his shirt. He watched the cracked fields slowly soften under the falling water. Tala stepped out behind him, her dark hair wild in the wind, rain glistening on her muscular arms. "The storm came fast," Jonas said, his voice rough. Tala said nothing. She stepped down from the porch, tilting her face to the sky, eyes closed. Rain mixed with dust and dried blood on her skin, washing away everything that was left of her past. Jonas watched her for a long moment. She was no longer the abandoned woman he had found in the desert. Standing before him now was a warrior and a free human being. As the rain began to ease, Jonas stepped out into the yard and stood beside her. The two of them stood in silence for a long time, listening to the steady patter of rain. "You can leave," Jonas said slowly. "They will not hunt you anymore. The road south still leads to town." Tala turned to him, her eyes calm but deep. "And do you want me to leave?" Jonas was quiet. Rain rolled down his sun-darkened face. Finally, he shook his head. "Number, I think this ranch. It is no longer big enough for just one person." A faint smile crossed Tala's lips, the first true smile since the day he saved her. That whole afternoon, the two worked side by side, clearing the yard, turning over the soil, repairing the fence. Tala carried the heaviest logs. Jonas drove the posts. By the time the sun broke through the clouds again, the ranch looked different, stronger, cleaner, and filled with the scent of new earth. When night came, Jonas lit a fire in the yard. They sat beside it, watching the sparks drift into the dark sky. For the first time in years, Jonas did not feel alone. Tala laid her spear on the ground, a silent promise. Jonas lit a cigarette and smiled gently. "Tomorrow, we build a new horse pen." Tala nodded. The firelight cast her face in a warm glow, strong but peaceful. In the quiet of the night, the rain had stopped. All that remained was the smell of damp earth and the feeling that something new had begun. Sometimes we do not get to choose where we are born, but we can choose where we stand. And sometimes, choosing to stand beside someone else means daring to stand against the world. In that very moment, when two lost souls decide not to walk away, a true home is built, not just from wood and nails, but from courage and trust.